So welcome everyone to the balance panel where we're going to tackle the question, what does balance really mean anyway? And this is hosted by the Wordle Center for Leadership. My name is Annie Del Busto Cohen. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the leadership development designer and co-director of the LEAD program for the Wordle Center. And I'm really excited to have these fantastic panelists join us to kind of piece apart what does balance mean, especially in today's economy and society and at Smith. So I'm excited to hear your own perspectives from your own individual vantage points. So let's all take a minute to introduce ourselves and kind of where you are on campus. And also, I'd say, like, if you want to just jump in answering the question, so what does balance really mean to you anyway? And we can just kind of start it from there. Does that sound okay? Awesome. All right, cool. Anybody want to start?
I can start. So my name is Destiny. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior at Smith, a sociology major, Africana Studies minor, and poetry concentrator. And I'm also the vice chair of the Black Student Alliance. So I think for me, what balance really means is, and I think this looks different for everybody, but I think balance in my definition, my lens, my perspective, really is just allowing yourself to one, take advantage of multifaceted of being multifaceted, but also allowing yourself to be a human in the mix of that, because I think it's great to be able to accomplish so many things and to be involved in so many different things and quote unquote spread your wings, if that makes sense. But I think it also is also like faulty to kind of put yourself in that position, but also not allow yourself to still be human in that instance, because we're not machines. So yeah.
Thank you.
I can pick up from there. And I really like that answer because I think sometimes the directive to find balance is kind of like, okay, say no to things, like shut things off. And that's, not necessarily like how we want to live either. I'm Jen Malkowski. I use they, them pronouns. I'm an associate professor and chair of film and media studies. And I think maybe similar to you, Destiny, I take on a lot of things and find myself sometimes spread pretty thin. But I think balance to me feels like when I look at a role in my life and I say, I feel like I'm doing a good job at this role, like I'm giving enough to it, I have enough capacity to do what I've committed to doing in this role. And I know when things are out of balance for me, when I'm feeling a lot of guilt about like things I'm not getting to within that role, which as a department chair is admittedly a lot of the time. I'll flip it over to you, Sarah.
Thanks. So I'm Sarah Bricky Wynn. I use she, her pronouns. I am an associate director of admission here at Smith. And when I think about balance, and I've thought about this a lot, like what is the definition of balance? I'm not sure exactly what mine is, but I think I've settled on it's me having a conversation with myself of what is demanding on me in that moment or in that day or in that time span or whatever I'm thinking about, and just being intentional about what my priorities are and what I'm going to cut back on, but also what I need to do more of. And I think to me, balance is not something that you strike. It's this constant negotiation, I think, that you're having internally and sometimes externally, depending on, who holds needs from you, right? But I really think it's just about this, negotiation of your time and your energy and what is most important in that moment or in that logic that you might be having in that moment. So that's what I would say.
Thanks. I think to piggyback back off of that, I'm thinking about just entering into this conversation at 5:30, 5:43 p.m. at the end of the day, at the almost the end of the week. And even coming into like just talking with Sarah, transitioning from work to parent to back to work to that, that's upstairs. I'm thinking a lot about like how I grapple with this concept of balance and how it intersects in all the different facets of my life, very similarly to what you all are talking about, and that there's like this give and take, or do I feel guilty, or am I letting something go, or am I taking care of myself? Have I role modeled? I think especially in my role in the Leadership Center, I think a lot about like, am I role modeling this thing that I'm trying really hard to embody? And sometimes it feels impossible to have balance when there are all of these competing demands for everything. Um, and so what does that mean? Like, how do I reconcile what feels like it's impossible? Um, and I don't know. I mean, I don't even know really what that means, especially as a parent of a toddler and of like full-time working parent and partner and all of the other multiple identities that I hold. Like, is that actually a realistic thing to achieve, or to strive toward? And I want to say yes, like, because it's supposed to, like, you have to take care of yourself, right? Like, and at the same time, it feels like there are a lot of challenges that contribute to that. So I don't know. I wonder, how do you all, I mean, so part of this panel is for us to, kind of just keep tossing it around with each other. So how do you all navigate the complexities of how you define it in your own lives?
I think for me, I was actually gonna pose this question, and I'm glad you brought up specifically your experiences with what balance would look like for you being a partner, also being a mom. I think that would look different for me being when we're comparing like student versus faculty and what that looks like for you guys on a daily basis, coming home from work and coming into work, and then me also living on campus and being a student full time. I think for me, as far as like being a student, I think balance is definitely tricky. Especially during this college time where there's such a oh, sorry, I can't speak today. Such a pivotal role in position where I'm kind of transitioning out of undergrad and moving into well, I'm already in adulthood, but out of undergrad. I think it's definitely difficult with all of the different challenges and new things that come with that. I think it's very interesting to see like what each of our like outside lives, outside of our obligations being like work or school or classes, what our outside looks like, and what brings that balance. So I think for me, what brings more balance for me, I think, is and this sounds like silly, but like sleeping, going to sleep. Like when I get an email or there's an issue with some sort of meeting that I have to have, or if I have to do some sort of delegation, and just my head is just not there right now. To be quite honest, like sometimes your head is not in the space to take on certain tasks, and I think for me, what I need to create that balance is just putting the phone down and taking a nap and then revisiting. Revisiting at a later Thank you for that thumbs up. Yes, taking a nap, taking a step back. If I can delegate to somebody else, delegating that appropriately. But yes, simply going to sleep, because I think a lot of us forget, and I think I'm definitely guilty of this, that we're humans and we need to sleep. We need to eat. I think one thing for me that has caused a lack of balance in my experiences in general, but also specifically on campus, is like something I've been trying to get out of is having work or dinner meetings. Because at least for me as a student, a lot of my free time is either during a lunch block or a dinner block, or past 8 o'clock, I'm going to sleep. So please don't contact me about a meeting. That's like what it is for me. I think as far as like setting boundaries for for when anything quote unquote work related comes up, or emails or anything like that. So I think that's like kind of my way of like creating balance for myself. Yeah, and sorry, I'm very long-winded, but yeah, just creating balance as far as making sure that I'm organized with whatever meetings I have, but I'm also sticking to allowing myself to shut that off at a certain hour, and calling my folks at home, quite honestly, because it's very easy to get wrapped up here and everything that's going on day to day. So just calling my folks at home, and like just being able to step away from all of the things that seem so big in the grand scheme of things. But in my opinion, my family and my personal life can be a lot bigger than that. So just remembering that.
I wonder, Destiny, I was thinking about, in addition to those strategies you mentioned, I was thinking about the combination of things you're studying. And I'm like, okay, sociology, Africana studies, poetry. Is there like a recharge in there? Because I know for me, like poetry is a real recharge.
We're
So
working
I
on
wonder
it.
if, you know,
We're working on it. Yeah. For me, I would say poetry is a bit of the recharge, but I think also because I'm doing the part of the poetry concentration is where you're also doing a capstone where you essentially start publishing a book. So I'm very excited about that. However, it is still tasking at the moment. But I still do like to write on my own, even if it's like not class related or it's not going to be in the book or whatever the case is. But that is something that I've always done from much younger. I would say probably since I was 10 or 11, like writing poems or just journaling. That's something that's like helped me create balance. And to be quite honest, crying, allowing a release of some sort, because it's very frustrating when you have a lot of work, not enough time to do it, other tasks and responsibilities in certain orgs. But yeah, just allowing a release of some pattern. Yeah.
You're very wise, Smithy. I don't know that I could say that I was like at that point when I was a senior in college. So I love that you're prioritizing rest. I think that that is so important and hard to do, especially at Smith, because there's so many things. Like I remember even a sense of FOMO. FOMO didn't exist in the early 2000s, but the feeling did of like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna miss this or I'm gonna miss that, or there are so many things
Mhm.
to take advantage of. And um,
Yeah.
I love that you're also finding a way of like, I have to take care of this vessel to also be
Yeah.
present with other things.
I've been trying to find a balance between that as well, because I did come in COVID year. So I came in 2020. So I missed my entire first year. Well, I was on campus for other reasons, but everyone else generally was not on campus. So um, the traditional Smith experience for a first year I didn't have. And partial of like my sophomore year also was not the traditional, obviously, because so many things were changing during COVID. But yeah, I feel like because this is my last semester, I have FOMO, but I'm also like trying to just sit back, recharge, allow myself to just say no sometimes. Like you were saying, Jen, just say no sometimes. As hard as it may be sometimes, just saying no, or like I can put this off till later. But yeah, definitely resonate.
I think one thing I've been thinking about in trying to find balance more often than not is, okay, saying no. Yeah, we all are like, yeah, we got to say no to things, but it's so hard. And I have been thinking about, what are my vulnerabilities? What are the times I find myself not saying no when I should? And not just like I should be saying no and I'm not, but what does that tell me about what I'm valuing? Right. So I was talking to a partner about this a while ago, and I said, oh, I said I'd be on this committee. I really don't have time, but, and she's like, why did you say yes? And I said, well, because like this person asked me, who I really respect and I really like working with. And she said, you often like the decisions you make at work are relationship based, right? It's like, I want to help this person, I want to collaborate with this person. And I think, what I'm realizing from that is not that I should say no to people I like, but that it's more incentive to say no in some of the other areas where I'm vulnerable so that I can keep space open for those collaborations that present themselves.
I also think that that's such an important point too, because I think sometimes I feel like I get the recharge from giving my time to the people or the relationships that I want. So maybe I'm not saying no to them, but it's because I'm invested and get something also
Mhm.
nourishing from it myself, right? So, and I think that that's also like just a good reminder. Like I'm having a moment of, oh yeah, that because I'm very focused on relationality too. And so many of my decisions are made around like, I have a partnership with somebody and I care about that. And then like, I'm okay making the sacrifice or taking this thing on because I really care or value about this working relationship. And it brings something to me in that. And not even just work. I mean, I think that extends to other, friendships or other relationships outside.
And I think coming back to what you were mentioning, Destiny, about the COVID time, I think when everything was online, we lost that ability to be in a room working with people we liked collaborating with. And I think, yeah, Annie, like you, I've kind of actually been recharging from those experiences more so than before. I think I have a new appreciation for them because there were so few opportunities for a while.
One thing that I was going to say too is during COVID, I think I learned a really big lesson that I still think about when I think about balance now, that, I still definitely see in the Smith community, and I really respect it and appreciate it's come about. But when COVID first hit, we were all home 24/7. I had one kid at the time. I now have two, but I had one kid at the time and a partner. And a lot of the online work that we did for admitted students really landed on me. And, I started working crazy hours and kind of poured myself into working, one, because I cared a lot about the work, right? I cared a lot about the students that we were working with, the current Smithies that I had relationships with, the admitted students that were going through such an insane time. And there was a certain point, where my husband came to me and he said, you aren't plugged in at home at all. You are burying yourself in work. And I respect that and I appreciate that. And I need your help. And I need you to help me because we don't have childcare and it's just me and the kid. And I need your help. And, it felt like it was a realization for me, I think, in thinking about balance, that I was burying myself in things that felt safe and comfortable in the moment, or that felt like I was giving some kind of purpose or good energy towards something that felt good. When in reality, it was really burning me and hurting relationships that I cared about. And when I was able to really pull away and draw some very intentional lines, somewhat forced on me by my family, right? When I plugged back into my family, I realized I can still do good work and I can still do the things that I want to do, and spending time with my family, Destiny, like you were saying, when you were saying, sometimes I just call home and I talk to my family and they put this huge perspective of what's important. And so what felt like such pivotal, critical, I must do work things, as soon as I've spent 30 minutes with my daughter, I'm like, that thing, it's fine. It will work out. I will get it done. And I'm so happy that I had this funny moment with my kid or did this other thing. And yeah, I'm exhausted, but I'm so much happier and my perspective has now changed. So, I think I keep thinking back to that moment when I feel kind of my work balance growing to this place that doesn't feel sustainable, or that feels like, you close your laptop or turn off your phone, but you still feel that heart race of oh my God, I have to do the thing and I've got that. But if I don't send the email now, then I won't have time tomorrow. And then this person's going to be upset because I haven't gotten back to them about, right? If I can truly force myself to shut that off when the day is done and just focus on what's in front of me, my family, my, whatever is happening in that moment, I am still tired, but I'm also gaining energy because I'm doing things that bring me a different kind of joy and a different perspective, right? And I think, again, it gets back to this idea of like negotiating your balance, right? Like nothing is ever balanced. I never feel like I'm giving enough to my family, myself, my job, whatever. But I have to give some to all, and they all sustain me in some way, right? But making sure that you're not tipping too deep into one thing at a time, because each of those things helps you maintain your perspective on what's too much. So that's something that I think back to a lot. And I think also it's this example setting, I think, Annie, that you were talking about is I'm like, you know, maybe I'm the only senior staff member that's saying no to these things and other people are quickly signing up for them. So what example am I setting for, you know, younger folks in this career or what have you? I'm showing them that it's okay to say no and that you don't have to say yes to everything that comes your way. And it's okay to be like, I don't do emails after 7, or I don't, you know, it is unlike you're going to be able to pull me on a Saturday or Sunday unless it's something super important, because that's my family time, right? And of course, there's times in our work when we have to, but you know, I do think it's still important to show that you can be in a senior level position and still live a full life, right? And say no to things and still be good at your job. And I think that's also, it's hard, but it's critical. So I really appreciate what you said, Destiny, about the perspective piece, because like that's what it is my kids exhaust me, but they give me perspective.
Yes, I definitely agree. I think just what you were touching on about like having balance between work or school or whatever your big sort of like obligation is, having balance between that and like your home life it's so hard. I think especially because work or school, that is like within the Monday to Friday frame. If you're only working Monday to Friday, keep that in mind. That's a large portion of the week. And it's every week. So just think about how much time you're spending at work or at school, and how much time you have after. And I think I was having a conversation with a mentor of mine, and, and we were talking about I think she was telling me about her experiences at like multiple different jobs within her career. And she was saying, you know, when you work, you know, unfortunately in the society like that we live in, you have to work to make money, to pay bills, and to make your living. But that's not your life. I think she's saying like it's a part of your life and it's something you may or may not have passion for, but it's not your life. And those things can blend very quickly when you spend so much time with your work. And it can become a great big part of you, which is also amazing. But she was telling me as I'm like now transitioning into the full-time like workforce, she was telling me like don't forget that it's great to have passion for what you're doing, but don't let it consume you to the point where your job is now your full-on life. And I think I thought about that a little bit more about, especially with work culture and the idea that you know, the more you stay at work, you get overtime, you get paid more, you get reward more. And even with certain jobs with certain what am I saying? With certain perks. For example, if you work in a big company, there are perks like gym memberships or just things like that. And I think in my perspective, this is like another way for them to keep you in the building, to keep you at work, to keep you invested in them. And I think that's great for people who would like to do that. But I also think in a way it kind of it consumes you. It allows you to keep staying there because they're giving you all of these advantages, and in the grand scheme of things, they're not the biggest advantages, if that makes sense. But I think when thinking about it, it just makes me think so much about how like our capitalistic society is so it's consuming. It's very consuming. And it's very hard in the grand scheme of that to create that balance overall. But yeah.
That's something I wanted to talk about too. And I'm thinking about Annie and Sarah, what you're talking about role modeling. And there's a sense in which I think, oh, I should show, you know, the people I mentor and my students how to have like healthy boundaries and good balance. And then I think about it and I'm like, if I had maintained something that felt balanced to me early in my career, there's no way I would have this job. I mean, the reality was I just had to write and publish and write and publish and teach and network and all this stuff, just hardcore for like a decade, until I got a permanent position. Not every industry is like that, but some are. And if you want to be in them, there's going to be a period of your life where you really, really are going to struggle to maintain balance. And I think it's such a privilege, those of us who are in a position to say yes or no to work tasks, right? Many kinds of jobs, there is no, like, you can't say no. You, as you mentioned, Destiny, you're working like beyond Monday through Friday. So I really feel for people coming into the workforce because I think these values are so important. And to the extent that we can live them and model them, we make work life better for everybody. And also there's some careers and some economic situations where you're just not really going to have that option to find balance on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that also really resonates in some ways that I think that like part of the role modeling for me is role modeling the complexity of it, that it's not that it's achieved, it's that it's also a human struggle, and that based on identity, based on positionality, it will be harder or easier for some people to navigate. Um, but it was interesting, like just going back to the COVID piece. Uh, so Sarah, you had one kid. I had my first kid when we went into the pandemic, and it was the first time I was teaching our class and like launching our cohort program online. And it was a moment in like both, the first time being a parent and then also the first time teaching where I was like, I have a baby that's crying on my lap and I have a screen full of students and I have to feed this child and do this thing and like am I being unprofessional? Am I not? How do I balance these competing things? Like I'm home for safety and exhausted and it was a really, I think being in that moment of time shifted so many things for me in terms of what felt important and has now like proved to be a tension I can't resolve in terms of how time is spent. And so Destiny, when you're talking about like the amount of time spent at work, often I'll have this internal argument with myself on I spend more time at work than I spend with my family, and I'm spending time at work to provide for my family, and I care about my work and what has to give. And it feels conflicting. Like it for me, it feels like a real challenge on sometimes I don't always feel balanced that way because it's coming home and doing all the things that I need to do to get us through the day, to get us ready for the next day, and then to spend time as a family on the weekend when we have all the things that we didn't have time during the week to do. And so it's like I struggle with it being part of a capitalist cog and also, like trying to dismantle it and all of those things at the same time. And that also feels like, a real fundamental challenge. Um, but also thinking that like I'm balanced in my work when I'm also balanced in my life, and I'm balanced in my life when I'm also balanced in work, and that they're not, I have a really hard time compartmentalizing the different pieces of who I am and the different roles that I hold because they tend to flow. Like if I have a hard time at work and I have to come home and do things, that shift sometimes takes a lot. And sometimes it doesn't shift. And it's like, okay, I don't feel balanced, but I'm also required in this other place. How do I allow that to exist and to not fully occupy me and to also like still move through it. And so I'm feeling like, yeah, sleep is really important. Those rest moments are really important because they also help to give perspective. So
That's where the wheels really come off if sleep isn't there.
yeah, really.
Oh, there's my kid yelling at me, it's time to go in the hot tub. Not quite. 21 more minutes. No, but I remember that I also was parenting in early COVID. I had a 2-year-old, one of like a not a good age to lose all childcare and still have to keep doing your job. And I remember it was during that time that my kid decided she was going to be waking up at 5 a.m. every day, sometimes like 4:45. And there was a period there where I was like, I cannot do the thing anymore. So yeah, I mean, I think a point of consensus here is like, if you're not sleeping, you're not going to do any of it. That's a bottom line.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think just going back to what you had mentioned, Annie, about what did you say? There were so many good things. You mentioned like, am I being professional? And I think I'm gonna pivot the conversation a little bit in that light. I think for me, in terms of balance, in terms of the quote unquote, am I being professional? I think one, that is like, that whole us thinking that is like a problem in itself. The fact that we have to mask ourselves in certain ways, especially in certain spaces, when you're at work, when you're at school, when you're at a certain in any certain space that that warners or garners that sort of cadence, if that makes sense. But I think for me, specifically like being a Black student on this campus, balance has been hard. I think specifically with the phrase like, am I being professional? It reminds me of the phrase like, quote unquote, am I white enough? Or am I fitting in with everybody else who goes here? All of the students who have certain privileges, like when it comes to income, family background, having legacy at Smith, just things of that nature. I think it's exhausting, if I'm being honest, trying to find balance as a Black student, specifically with feeling like you have to mold yourself into these spaces. And when you say professional, I also think of code switching. So having to speak in a certain way in classrooms. And that's something I've been like trying to break out of in all of my like classroom settings, any meetings I have with faculty or anything like that, just because it's exhausting, to be quite honest. I feel like one of the easier ways to describe it for me is like when you don't want to have your camera on during COVID, and you have to like, you feel like you have to present yourself in this manner that is just not you at the moment. Like the sitting up straight, watching your face in the camera, and like it just feels like unreal, if that makes sense. And I think creating or finding that balance is always exhausting and hard. And something I often think about in my like everyday whereabouts when I'm like speaking to other classmates who may not look like me, but also when I'm speaking to my professors and what their relationships look like with other white students as opposed to what they may look like with me. And I think something that made me really think about this was a conversation I had with one of my professors who is also Black. He's in the Africana Studies department, Aaron Kamugisha. I think I'm also Caribbean, and so is Professor Kamugisha. So I think he was the first professor, and mainly, yeah, he was the first professor as far as me being able to establish that close relationship and bond, I would say, with a professor of mine. I think it was definitely difficult trying to see myself in my other professors. And a lot of my other professors, it felt like a relationship of you simply teach me, I receive the information, I replicate or give back any sort of assignments, work, classwork. And that's kind of what it was for a lot of my other professors who were or white or just don't look like me. So I think my relationship with Professor Kamugisha was one of the first moments where I felt like I I didn't notice it at first that my relationship with my white teachers were not how I wanted them to be. But I think having that relationship with him definitely opened my eyes up to how different things are, and how things used to feel like for me in high school, where all of my teachers were like predominantly Black or brown. So yeah, definitely something I think about commonly when thinking about balance as far as identity goes.
And I think what you're speaking to is the kind of energy cost or the emotional cost of an hour of work, let's say, is really dependent on identity and how comfortable you feel in that space and how much you can be yourself. It takes more out of someone to go through an hour where you're having to present in a way that doesn't feel true to you. And you need more rest, you need more recharge when you're in that kind of context, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that to complicate the conversation a little bit more too, because I think I imagine, especially at a residential campus, that then filters over into all these other components of life, right? Like the sense of belonging, the sense of being able to be one's authentic self, having to code switch, having to be like navigate a predominantly white institution. It's a lot. And so that balance is experienced differently based on the intersection of identities for sure. So I just want to put a pin in what's a really rich conversation and invite Albert if you'd like to join us because we usually have like about 40 minutes of conversation of the panelists and then 20 minutes of Q&A, but we kind of have this unique experience of having a smaller crowd. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you join. If not, feel free to keep just listening and we can keep going. But I just wanted to open that up in case you had questions or if you wanted to comment.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for sharing all that perspective that everybody has. Speaking of balance, I had a lot to do today during the day that I usually don't do. So I had to do it, all the stuff that I had to do during the day, I had to do now. But then I got my 2-year-old, my 19-month daughter, Gigi here. And I normally don't do this much screen time, but today I think is an exception. It's like, I'm not perfect. I'm going to do some, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for sharing our perspective. And Destiny, thank you for sharing that analogy with the Zoom screen. I hadn't thought of that before. That's obviously I'm not going to fully understand what you're going through based on one analogy, but it did give me a food for thought. And yeah, I guess the only thing I'll say when it comes to the balance is that, yeah, you're just not going to do everything perfectly, right? Like, I'm not going to be a no screen time parent. It's just going to happen sometimes, right? I'm not going to give, not always going to bring my best self to my students. Like sometimes I get grouchy and stuff like that. If it gets bad, I'll definitely follow up with them and say, hey, this is not about you. I'm really sorry that happened. Or, as you said about like being a spouse, like the other day, I'll fully confess, like I had a rough day and I brought a bad mood home and I didn't feel great, but I took some time to think about it and apologized to my wife and said, you know what, I realized that it was because I overstacked the late part of the day, right? So anyways, all this to go into say, for me, balance is about just accepting that you're not going to do everything perfectly. Yeah.
Thanks.
Albert, if you ever need to feel better about screen time for your kid, as a media studies professor, we'll talk sometime. It's actually okay. There's ways to do it that are okay.
Thank you.
And can you share that? Because I also have that guilt too. That's what we were talking about.
Yeah. Well, actually,
So-
maybe it's a little bit related to this. I think for many of us who are parents, it's like sometimes we have to do something while our kid does something else. And many people that's what screen time is for, right? And it is for that sometimes, but actually the best kind of outcomes for kids, actually like how to acclimate them to media culture and I know this is gonna like take away all the value we see in it, but is to engage screen time with them, right?
Yeah.
So you watch things together, you play video games together, like it actually can be really generative for them. You can't do it all the time, but I think when we as parents only think about screen time as like this is where we plop our kids when we need time, it's like do that, but also like share media together is really valuable for kids who are coming into a media saturated world once they don't have those parental controls anyway, you know.
Oh, and I'm sorry, just one more quick thing that I just wanted to add is that I know Destiny, you're being like outnumbered 4-1 in terms of the parents. So this is definitely not. I was hearing you speak, and it was like, oh yeah, let's take it back to undergrad. It isn't so much about like what situation you're in. It's just like I was saying, it's just like it's adapting to the change and finding balance in change. So I hope you don't feel like, oh, just because we're parents, you're not, that somehow, oh, we have this different higher perspective or
Oh,
whatever.
not at all.
Yeah.
I 100%, yeah, I can
Okay.
100% see that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right, great.
One thing that I wanted to say that I'm noticing in some of our conversations that we maybe haven't talked a lot about yet is we're talking a lot about like the responsibility that we have to strike our own balance and how we maintain our balance, but also do what we need for other people. But I think the one thing that we haven't really talked a lot about is how critical other people are to maintaining your balance. Like the only reason why I can even remotely get close to a space of balance is because I have people in my life that help me, that either help keep me in check or that literally help me, right? Like a best friend who will show up and take my kid hiking for a few hours because she can sense that like I'm struggling and I have lots of work to do, and the baby is sick and the toddler is bored, and right, and so she'll just show up at my door, take my kid and go for a couple of hours, and I'm like, without you, what would I do, right? And so I think there is this communal aspect to self-preservation and balance too that we haven't really touched on a lot, and you can't be balanced by yourself, right? Like I truly feel like in my bones, if you don't have the right people surrounding you in life, you can't even remotely get close to achieving any kind of balance. And I'm curious to hear people's thoughts about that, but I feel it very deeply that without my people, I wouldn't survive a single day, probably.
I definitely agree. I think although I don't have children, I'll have children one day. But I think as far as my balance, my friends check me in that way as well. And I think my family, although my relationship with them is a little different than it is with my friends on campus, I think I'm not one to tell you when I'm burnt out, but you will physically see that I'm burnt out. And one of my friends recently, she was like, I can tell like there's a lot going on. And I was like, no, there's nothing going on. And she's just like, just come sit down with me. And I think that just come sit down with me, it helps. Even though like there's just all these things running through your mind, all these tabs open. I always use this analogy where there's like 18 tabs open and you don't know where the music is coming from. Like that that is always like how I feel when I'm like walking on campus and I'm like responding to emails and I'm sending out weekly agendas for meetings that I'm having for BSA and things like that. I think about that moment, think back to that moment of like just sit down. Like you don't have to walk and send text messages and they'll get the email, they'll get the text. Nobody's gonna die. No one's gonna die if you don't send it right this minute. So I think even in that same breath, I think also like taking I think for me specifically, because I do have that habit of like doing things all at the same time. So like walking and sending out emails, walking and posting something. Because I'm also I never said this, but I'm also a freelance makeup artist. So I also do a lot of content and stuff like that. So that's another thing about me. But but just keeping up with all these different tabs that I have open. I think yeah, just walk. Notice the trees, look at just observe. I think it's very hard for me at least to remember to just look what's in front of my eyes and just put the phone down, because there's so many other like obligations and things I have to get to. But just remembering to just allow yourself to just soak up what's around you, if that makes sense. Yeah.
You have all the best analogies, Destiny. It's like having 18 tabs open. That's perfect. Yeah, your friend sounds like they would have a promising career as a therapist. And I was thinking too about how important like therapeutic support is for so many of us in maintaining that balance too. And I think something I've seen, one of my partners is a therapist, so I'm like a proselytizer for this as well. And I've been helped by it, but I think I've been really happy to see, you know, since I like started teaching a long time ago, like a much reduced stigma around like seeking therapeutic support and using those resources, especially like at Smith. I think, you know, from what I see from students, it's so much a part of the culture. I'm happy people have that kind of support for like mental health that is so essential to balance, more so than I think college students did back when many of us were going to school.
Yeah, I can definitely agree in saying that it's very common for a lot of at least for the people that I interact with on a daily basis, or I'll have in class and hear somebody say something about therapy, or just being at the chat center regularly. I think it is definitely common. I didn't even think about that until you said that, but it is, I've noticed that it is very common, especially with the resources that Smith has with the chat center and everything associated with the chat center.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your friend saying, you seem like you have a lot going on. Just sit down. Like, let's take a minute. Let's talk about it. I think that's, you know, what resources like the Shock Center on campus, you know, can offer people too.
I think you both also, like you and Sarah, also are hitting on the importance of the relationships. Like Sarah had mentioned too, of that the people notice it, right? So like Sarah's friend shows up at the door, I'm going to take your child hiking, or your friend's like, I just see you, I'm going to sit down. And that, I think it's so important as a means of balance, whether it's a relationship with a therapist or a relationship with partners or a relationship with best friends or family or whoever, of people that know you well enough to be able to call you on that moment and say, I see you struggling, and maybe you won't ask for it for yourself, but I'm here and I'm going to help. And it's this interesting thing that a few of my friends have talked about recently. Of, I can't remember if I saw it on a social media platform or wherever, but instead of saying, you know, when somebody's struggling, what do you need? This idea of also just showing up and like bringing something. And so many of us, I think, like, it's easier to say, what do you need? And then just kind of wait for that person who's in crisis to have to tell you, right? And that's something I think that we've all, you know, been accustomed to doing, like reaching out and saying, I'm here if you need, but also like, what does it mean to just show up and be in that space? And I think sometimes those are the moments that help to feel most balanced, when you don't know what you need and somebody's able to just be there for you and say like, all right, go take the thing for yourself, go take a nap, I will take the child, sit down and have a snack, walk with me, look at the trees, close your computer, whatever it is. Or a therapist to be like, this is a space for you, just go, you know. Well, I'm so appreciative of the three of you. Any like closing thoughts or comments before we wrap up?
Just thank you for hosting this panel, first of all, and for everybody coming with open minds and open books. Yeah.
I was at a conference recently and people were talking about kind of burnout and how do we recharge and self-care. And I'd heard this elsewhere too, but I think they brought up a really good point that self-care isn't always like taking a bubble bath on your own or like reading a book or going for a walk by yourself. Like self-care is often like connecting with community and being a part of like the place that you are. So that's one more thought I had on balance, like kind of investing in community and those relationships and connections can be a part of that recharge too. And also, thanks everybody. It was a really nice conversation.
Yeah, I guess similarly, it's lovely to meet with people and talk to people about a shared difficulty, daily struggle, whatever you want to call it, that we're all grappling with in really different ways, but can connect so quickly and easily with each other on it. And I think it makes it less lonely and less unachievable, I guess. So yeah, definitely a nice moment. And Destiny, you have a very bright future, my friend. It's been so lovely to
Oh,
hear
thank
you
you.
reflect. So I hope that your peers are listening to you, because
Listen.
you're on a good path. So just so lucky to have met you as well.
Sarah, that's a compliment to you as well, since you admitted Destiny to
There
this.
you go.
Full circle. Full circle.
Listen, she does it all on her own. I always say that in admission. The students do all the hard work. We do the easy part, right? We just read how amazing they are. That's what we do. So Destiny worked it and made her own ticket in. So
For sure.
Thank you.
Well, it was really a pleasure. I hope, Jen, you get to soak in the hot tub. Sarah, you get some rejuvenating time, whatever that is. Destiny, you find some moments with community or through poetry or however you need to recharge, and that now we all know each other on campus a little bit more, and really hope, since it's 6:30 in the evening, everybody gets a chance to eat and rest and prioritize that. And again, so many thanks for joining us tonight, and really hope that especially Destiny, that your peers get to hear all the wonderful things that you had to share, and yeah, just appreciate you all. So thanks.
Thank you, Annie.
yeah.
Good night.
Bye.